You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi, and welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, part of the Hiking Radio Network and sponsored by Trailtopia Adventure Food. Today, we're up to episode number 79 with Maria Wishart, or Wheezy P. And yes, you will find out why she is known as Wheezy P. She has a devotion to the AT that is literally life-altering. The two of us laughed a lot during the show, and I know that you're going to love hearing Maria's story. We've also got my fellow podcaster and author and all-round good guy, Gary Sizer. Gary has been on the show twice before, and this time he's going to be telling us about the Foothills Trail. Before we get on to anything else, though, I think it's dinner time. Do you remember those cold, wet evenings on the trail when you pitched up at a shelter and there was nothing you would have rather had than a beautiful, hot, home-cooked meal? Well, apart from actually going home, you could try out one of the delicious meals from Trailtopia. Why not dig into their spectacular jambalaya with its authentic Creole flavour? Or how about their beef stew, which is loaded with beef, potatoes, carrots, mushrooms, corn, green beans and green bell pepper in a fantastic beef gravy? Go on, try them. Trust me, you'll love them. Trailtopia, the best of home cooking away from home. Now, this is going to be a slightly longer intro than normal because I've got something kind of exciting to share with you all. If you're listening to this episode on Thursday, the 22nd of March, 2018, then today marks the 4th anniversary of me standing utterly clueless on the top of Springer Mountain in Georgia and wondering what it was that I was meant to be doing next. Well, 5 million steps, 3 books, several speeches and presentations, exactly 100 podcast episodes, and over 250,000 downloads later, I formed the Hiking Radio Network, and today I'm unveiling 2 new shows. Several of you may have seen a video teaser for Dixie Live on the Continental Divide Trail earlier this week, and I'm going to come back to that show in a moment. The other new show is one that I produce with Anna Huthmaker as the host. You'll doubtless remember the inspirational Anna from a few episodes ago on this show. She started Trail Dames, a group of supportive women hikers after she hiked 700 miles of the AT in 2003. This group has now grown across the country into several different chapters and over 8,000 women hiker members. As soon as I spoke with Anna, I was sure that she'd be a great host, so we started talking about a monthly podcast, basically to see how well it would be received before we decide how to go forward. That show, the Trail Dames podcast, released its first monthly episode yesterday. I have a link in the show notes to the site that we're currently using while the Hiking Radio Network site is being built. We're on the lookout for sponsors for this show, so if you're interested or if you know somebody or some company who may be interested, please let me know. My wife Diane, who has listened to episode number 1, tells me that she thinks it's going to be a great success. The other show is with Jessica Mills, or Dixie. Now, this podcast presented me with a few difficulties. The show itself is going to be great. We've already recorded 2 interviews in the build-up to her departure, and the first of those should be released today, if you're listening on Thursday, or tomorrow. I can't work that one out. The thing that gave me a few problems was that Jessica is such a purist, in a really nice way, that she was reluctant to have sponsors, so I've had to be creative about how we fund the show. The idea is this. I'm going to be interviewing Jessica twice a week when she's on the trail and publishing those episodes within between 1 and 24 hours. The rationale for this is to give pretty much real-time updates of her progress and her adventures to her fans. She'll still be doing her videos, so you'll still get those, but these interviews will be her sort of in-the-moment stuff, and with Jessica, as you probably remember from her videos, she keeps it real. Given the constraints with sponsors, I've decided to ask listeners to fund these podcasts. I have no idea how many of you will sign up, but thought I'd charge $4 a month, which should work out at less than 50 cents a show. Once I reach, say, 500 subscribers, I'll be giving out prizes from the funds that I receive. If it goes much better than expected, then there will almost certainly be weekly prizes. I just don't know right now. The good news, though, is that the episodes for the rest of March are going to be free, so you're going to be able to see if you like them before you sign up. Instructions on how to sign up and where to find the early episodes will be posted on all the Facebook sites in the next couple of days. I'm sorry for taking so long, but I really wanted to share this great news with you. I should also tell you that I'm currently considering 2 other shows for the Hiking Radio Network, both of which will be free. So I hope that you understand that I'm trying to fund these shows the best way I can with a mix of sponsors and listeners. So, without further ado, and having put her off for so long, let's listen to the very engaging Maria Wishart, or Wheezy P. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to a listener now who reached out to me a few weeks ago and shared what I think is an amazing AT story. I absolutely loved it. She wrote it out and I thought, well, we've got to have this lady on the show. This is Maria Wishart. Hi, Maria. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. And I think the first thing we need to get out of the way is your trail name, which is Wheezy P. And I'd like you to tell us what that's. Yeah, I'd like you to tell us what that's about. But remember that this is a family show, so be careful.
All right. So I have severe asthma, and so in Vermont, I got the trail name Wheezy the Turtle for my crazy skills of climbing hills and mountains. It was coming out of West Hartford. I was wheezing. I was going very slow, so I became Wheezy the Turtle. Fast forward a few months, I'm down to do a section at Snickers Gap. It was a long drive. I did not bring a change of shorts, and let's just say I had an accident. I did not get 5 feet out of the parking lot before one of the guys that we went with, who was actually doing a shakedown for a thru hike, turns to me and goes, "That's it. You're not Wheezy the Turtle anymore. You are Wheezy P." And I was like, "No." And he's like, "No, it's been said. It's done. That's it." And it's been Wheezy P since.
Good for you for taking it on board. You realize you are allowed not to accept it, but you accepted it. So that's amazing.
I got him back though.
All right.
He was Badger. He's now Barfy Badger. So.
Yeah, be careful how you name somebody. You're quite right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, you came to hiking fairly recently, and in your email, you mentioned that you were hiking Mount Greylock, which I loved, by the way, back in 2013 with your husband. You found yourself on the AT. And what impact did that have upon you?
Well, I remember just coming to that pond that's just below the summit of Mount Greylock with the little cabin.
Oh, yeah. Lovely.
And it just reminded me of Thoreau. And I just love that. And I to this day, that's my favorite spot on Greylock. It's absolutely beautiful. And after that, reaching the top and seeing that board inside the Bascom Lodge, and it tells you the mileage. And I never heard of the Appalachian Trail before, but seeing the distance to Springer and the distance to Katahdin, I just had to figure out what this Appalachian Trail was all about. So I Google searched it, and then that led to Google image searching. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I got to get a few more miles in on this trail.
Yeah.
So
before you go on about that, because I understand why that would be, and obviously I want to go back to that. But this thing about a lot of Americans still don't know about the Appalachian Trail, do they?
No,
don't you
a lot of people
I wonder why. I wonder why.
I don't know. It has, with A Walk in the Woods coming out in theaters, I thought more people would have heard of it. But when I mentioned to a lot of people, I section hike the Appalachian Trail, they say, "What's that?" And then I proceed to tell them, and they go, "Well, how long of a trail is it?" And I tell them, and some of the reactions I get are just are hilarious. But why would you want to do that? But yeah, a lot of people haven't heard of it. Even, now that I'm in Pennsylvania, even around the trail, people have never heard of the Appalachian Trail, which amazes me.
Yeah. So it made you want to look into it more. So you started doing research then, did you?
Yeah, I started looking at the trail, and I got a guide and decided, let's do Massachusetts. So the first time we did it, we went from Lee to Tyringham and back because we didn't know about shuttle drivers. So we hiked from Lee. We got lost and missed the turn towards Upper Goose Pond. So we ended up doing a 23-mile day that day.
Oh,
and
wow.
we had never hiked more than 10 miles before in our lives. And so,
that's a lot.
So it was a great introduction. And going back up that mountain out of Tyringham was definitely not fun for someone with asthma who hadn't hiked that many miles before.
Yeah.
So it was an experience. And then we looked into shuttling, and the cookie lady does shuttle. So we started shuttling with her, and we did Massachusetts.
Wow. So did you, that first day, 23 miles, when you got back to your car, you must have been exhausted. Did that not put you off, or did that encourage you more that you'd actually done 23 miles and you thought, well, we can do this?
I was really excited, actually. I was exhausted, but I just liked that feeling of being out there from sunrise to sunset. Was just such an amazing feeling. I'm like, I got to do this more often. Maybe not 23 miles, but I got to do this more often. And we talked to different people on the trail, and everybody was so nice. And that just increased my interest in being out there more.
And you've noticed that from day one, did you? How friendly people are out on the trail, and how prepared they are to engage straight away. That was one of the biggest shocks to me. How everybody just wanted to be friendly straight away, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be very, very shy. Until the trail, I was very shy, and I didn't talk to people that much. And once you're out there, like, everybody just wants to talk, and you find yourself in these conversations with a lot of times with no filter, like you have in society. You have this filter. You don't have filter. You share stories with people you would never share in regular life. So
no question about that.
Right away I noticed. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've overshared a few times.
Yeah, oversharing is a bit of a problem on the trail from time to time. You sometimes think, well, that cannot be said. That can't be unsaid, I'm afraid. So that was
no.
So what was it about the 80 as opposed to other trails? Because you obviously looked at, when you started Google searching, you looked at the images. Did you just look for the 80, or had you simply never seen or heard of other trails?
Well, actually, before we stepped foot on the Appalachian Trail, we were section hiking the Metacomet-Monadnock Trail, which is now been absorbed into part of the New England National Scenic Trail. Uh-huh. We had started kind of on Mount Tom in Holyoke, Mass. And so we had started with the intent of section hiking that. And because we found it when we were on Mount Tom, and we did about 5 sections of that before we found the Appalachian Trail.
So you chose the 80. That was the one you were looking to do. And what did you find that you were getting out of hiking in those early days? What was it like? What was it about hiking in the woods and over mountains that just really did it for you or hit a chord with you?
I think it gives you this feeling of peace and strength that you don't get with other, like, I was into working out at the gym and things like that. But when you're at the gym, you're just kind of walking to nowhere on a treadmill, and there's all this noise everywhere. But when you're out on the trail, it's just so peaceful, and people are friendlier, and it's getting away from everything. You burn a lot more calories than at the gym too, but it was just so nice to just be out there and, feel the cool breeze on a hot day, or, come to, you're struggling up a hill or a mountain, and you come to this beautiful view, and it's all worth it. All the struggle was just absolutely worth it. And I like the challenge of it. I'm a person who likes to challenge myself, and I just really like the challenge of it. And then it just exploded from there.
And it's certainly a sense of an accomplishment as well, isn't it? Once I remember this feeling so well of looking up at a mountain thinking, my God, the top must be here soon, and you keep going up and up, and then you actually get to the top, and you have this tremendous adrenaline rush that you've got there, don't you? Well, I found it anyway. Absolutely.
Like I said, with the asthma, every climb is a challenging climb for me. And when you're, especially when you're asthmatic and you can't breathe, and sometimes you're throwing up on the side of the trail.
Nice.
And, and you just push through that, and you push through all that pain and that difficulty, and you get to the top, you feel this huge, like, it's almost like a weight that's just lifted off of you, and you feel like, wow, I did that. I climbed that mountain and I got here, and look at the reward. The mountains are just gorgeous.
Yeah.
So there's nothing can beat that.
I wanted to ask you about that because in your email, and you've already mentioned already, you said you had severe activity-induced asthma. Now, that should have been a clue to you that what you were doing was an activity. It was going to induce asthma. And is this something you've coped with all your life? And how are you coping with it as you hike? Or do you just include that as part of your hike preparation? You know it's going to come, so you do it. And before you answer that, you also said you had a bad knee as well. So, talk me through how that's worked out.
Well, when I was growing up, my mom had a phrase, and basically when we would whine, she'd say, "You'll live." So basically, that's my approach to everything. You'll live. So I do have to take.
She won Mum of the Year award, didn't she, for empathy? God damn me, you'll live. Get over it.
She made sure she made sure we were tough, and my dad always made sure we were pretty tough too. And I hung out with the boys in the neighborhood, so I had to be a little tough. But I didn't actually find out I had asthma until there was a day on Mount Greylock when I had an asthma attack and didn't even know I had asthma.
Oh, right.
So
wow.
I said, wow, I really need to find out what's going on. That was a few years ago. So basically on trail, I've just learned to pace myself and just push through. And it's something that I have to think about, like, okay, I have a big climb coming up, and, should I rest at the bottom? I wear a watch that keeps track of the elevation. So I can look and say, oh, I have like 1,000 feet left. I can take a break, or, oh, I'm only 200 feet from the top. So I can try to push through this. But it's definitely tough. And sometimes it feels very defeating because, you've hiked a lot and you're trying to be in denial about the fact that you have asthma. So you see these people just flying past you up this hill, and you're like struggling, and they just kind of look over at you and you're struggling, and you just feel kind of like a little defeated and it's easy to get into a negative headspace, but you can't, because you still need to get the rest of the way to the top of the mountain.
Yeah, you know what? Interestingly, I think that's a bit like when you fall over. There's no point in just sitting there and being miserable. You've got to get up, because there's nowhere else to go, is there? Lying on the floor or standing at the side of a mountain, struggling with your asthma. You made the choice to get there. You knew you had asthma, so you just have to keep going, don't you?
Just have to keep going. And there's, you can't turn around. That's one of the things I love about hiking, is that you have to push through everything. It's not like the gym where you can just step off the treadmill.
Exactly.
And, we even go get some pizza. You have to keep going. And it does bring you a strength when you get up over. I was hiking yesterday at Three Ridges and in Virginia, and that was a tough climb, like with the cold wind. It took me a while to get up, and then once I'm up over the mountain, I'm good to go. But it took me a while to get up there. I've had 3 knee surgeries on my right knee, and I sprained my MCL on my left knee, so they give me problems.
Wow. Has the actual physicality of hiking helped you overcome some of these ailments, or you've been able to adapt them and just keep pushing through and adopting the you'll live attitude? Because sometimes so you're always going to. Do you always get the asthma, or is it helping to go away by the more hiking that you do?
I always get it. Some days I'm good. Like yesterday, I struggled up the climbs in the beginning part of the day. But the last climb of about 250 feet, I said to my husband, I'm going to be going slow. My asthma's been bad all day. I'm going to go slow. And I just flew up the climb. So sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's bad. Yeah.
Oh, dear. This is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, because you, despite this asthma, you've carried on going, which is just amazing. And I know at the time when you were first doing these in Massachusetts, you were just going out on day hikes. How did you get into overnight camping?
Well, I should say my husband had been pushing me to go camping since we met. And I was like, absolutely not. I do not like bugs. I do not like dirt. And I'm scared of bears.
But apart from that,
the hiking, there were a lot of negatives. So getting over the dirt and the bugs, although I'm still not a fan of spiders, that came with hiking. And then it's an interesting story, because we were on Mount Greylock, and I had been thinking about maybe backpacking, but was scared of bears. And we were with my daughter and her fiance, and we were all just like in the zone of like, we're ready for the hike to end. It was a long day. We were all tired, and we're just walking along. My husband has his head down, and he looks up, and there's a bear 5 feet from him.
Ooh.
and who was just eating berries off a bush. And so my daughter turned to me, she grabbed my arms and she's like, "Don't panic." And I'm thinking it's a snake because I don't like snakes either, or didn't at the time. And so I'm looking around and she goes, "There's a bear." And I'm like, "Oh, where? I want to see this bear." So we all just start making these like crazy, weird noises and waving our arms in the air and just looking absolutely ridiculous. And the bear just walks past us looking at us like we're crazy. And we all joked for the rest of the day about how that bear must have gone back to his den and joked around with his buddies about these crazy humans he saw. And after that, I mean, that night I woke my husband up at like 2:00 in the morning and I'm like, wake up. And he's like, "What?" I go, "I want to go camping." And he goes, "Why?" I go, "Because bears don't want anything to do with us."
Wow. Do you know what? Isn't that a great aha moment for you though? Don't you think? I think
Yeah,
that's wonderful
it was
to
great.
experience it. You have to experience it. And I felt similarly when I was concerned about bears. I wanted to see one, but one would have been enough for me. I just wanted to see one. But you know, I was nervous about it, but they want nothing to do with you, do they?
No, we saw Mama and her cub. We took a 3-day trip into Shenandoah, and I always wanted to see a cub, but everybody's like, you got to be careful with the moms and their babies. And just south of Loft Mountain, there we saw a bear on the trail, so we just stopped and we let her pass. And then this little baby just grabs his mom's leg and just pokes around the side to see us, and I was like, highlight of my trip.
Wow, I bet
Didn't
it
want
was.
anything to do with us. Yeah, just talk to her and let her pass. And she came back and forth a few times, and I just kept talking to her. And then they went off into the woods, and that was the end of it. So,
right. So after after your 2 a.m. revelation, where you said to your husband you like to go camping in the woods, once you got over that hurdle, how did you take things forward from there in your bid to hike more of the trail?
Well, we went to Greylock because that was our go-to mountain, and we camped out, and it downpoured that night.
Of course.
And one of the rangers there that we had talked to, this guy, Jared, he started talking to us about the long trail and how great. And he told us these backpacking stories. And I was like, I really need to go backpacking. And he's like, you'll love it. It's great. There's nothing like the feeling. And so we started saving up to get gear. And by the time we saved up enough money to get some lightweight gear, it was October. So we just started day hiking and started planning on just doing Massachusetts through backpacking trips in the following spring.
Right.
Because in the beginning, we didn't plan to hike the whole trail.
Yeah. Well, that's to come. So,
Yeah.
and that comes to what I saw when as people, my listeners know, I tend to do a bit of cyber stalking, and I went to your Instagram page, and you got a great quote from Tolkien: "Little by little, one travels far." And that pretty much sums up your approach to hiking the AT. Tell us about the progress you made while you were living in Massachusetts.
Well, we actually we did a lot of hiking. We would go in 2-day increments because our vacation time was very limited. So it involved these crazy 3 a.m. wake ups, hit the road at 3:30 and 4:00 in the morning, drive as far as, we needed to drive. And then we would hike, and sometimes it would just be a day hike. So we would drive, like we drove from Albany. We lived actually near Albany, New York, and we drove from Albany to Duncannon to do the section from Duncannon to 850 and then drove back. So it's a 5.5 hour drive.
Oh my gosh.
We just we've been chipping away at this, and we actually made significant progress in the amount of time that we lived there through these just little chipping away at the trail. I mean, we just wanted to get out there every chance that we got. And if that meant 2 days, if that meant a day, that was what we were going to do. Just to get some mileage in.
So you're starting to spread out along the trail in I guess in contiguous sections, filling up your trail as you went along. You have a little map you mark off and you know where you've been?
Yeah, I have a map of the AT, and then we just kind of draw a black line with magic marker over the sections that we finish.
Oh, right.
And we didn't go in order. We kind of we'd head south for a little bit, and then we would flip north. And, Pennsylvania we did it crazy because we had to find shuttle drivers in Pennsylvania that could shuttle us.
Oh
So
my
we did
gosh.
some in the south and then flipped up north and then did some in the north and then flipped back south and then filled in the middle. So
Wow.
it was a weird way of doing things.
But the whole time, are you literally filling in a map and spreading out bit by bit by bit, obviously going further south? Have you gone all the way north so far or not?
No, I've been as far north as Mount Washington.
All right. Okay. You've got Mount Washington. But then your ambitions started to grow, didn't they? Um, so you were getting up early to go to the trail, and you started to mark off those sections that were closer to home. But in the fall of 2017, you made a decision, which I thought was flipping extraordinary. Tell us about how that decision came about and how you discussed it, and what's your husband's reaction to this?
Well, we started talking about, we had done just a regular camping trip at Mount Greylock. It's always Mount Greylock. It's like the spark that starts fires.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
we had taken a camping trip there, and on the way home, we started talking about the trail and, how people on the trail are different and, so much friendlier. And we said, we started this idea that maybe someday we would move closer to the trail. Maybe 2 years from now, we'd move down to Waynesboro, Virginia. So we could be in a trail town and be close to the trail. And Shenandoah is a great place to hike. And so it started with that. And then within a week, there were rumors at his work that they were going to be going through a lot of layoffs. So things started just kind of snowballing. He started looking into what careers he could have and decided to get his CDL. And he interviewed with a company, and they had a position open in Carlisle that they offered him, Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And he's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, let's do it. So we came down we ended up in Duncannon, which is, Carlisle's only 30 minutes from Duncannon. So we were like, we can live in a trail town. And we moved. I had probably the best paying job with the best benefits that I had my entire life.
What is that? What you left? Is that what you left to move to Duncannon?
Yes. Yeah. It was a great job. I had some good friends there, and I went in and I was practically in tears when I gave them the 2 weeks, because I'm a person who kind of isn't good with change. So
wow.
it was scary.
I got to tell you, Maria, you're not striking me as a person who's not good with change. You're making changes all the darn time.
Routine. Yeah.
That is extraordinary. I mean, so you made this.
We're here.
So is your husband as trail obsessed as you are, or not?
No, we were just talking about that, actually.
Wow.
He likes going out backpacking. He does not like day hikes. He does not like out and backs, but he likes the backpacking on the AT. He likes the camaraderie at the shelters, but he doesn't really have any plan of completing the whole trail, especially now with his work schedule. And that changes how we're going to hike, because we're kind of trying to squeeze in some new mileage while his schedule is the way it is. And then it's going to change, and I'll be out on my own for the first time.
Wow. So all the miles you've done so far, you've done together, have you?
We've done together, except for 12.
And how do you feel about that, about going out on your own more?
Well, I've been kind of transitioning into it, because since we moved down here, I've been doing a lot of hikes by myself. I used to be terrified of the dark and terrified of the woods, and you put those two together and it wasn't good.
There's a winning combination. What with that,
exactly.
What with that, the knees and the asthma as well. My gosh, there can be few. There can be few people with as many no marks against them as you, but you're going ahead and doing this, which is even more extraordinary.
Well, I started hiking by myself, and then because one of the first snowfalls we had when we moved down here, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to drive up to Peters Mountain. I'm going to hike out to Table Rock in the dark with the snow falling by headlamp. And that was one of the most awesome experiences I've had. And I'm not scared of it anymore. But the last time we went out 2 weeks ago for a backpacking trip. And he said, you set up in your tent down the hill and just pretend I'm not here. And I'm another person at the shelter. And that's how we did it. And once you're in your tent and you hiked all day, you're tired. So it doesn't really matter. You know what?
So
I think I'll be okay.
I totally agree. it's a totally irrational comfort, isn't it? But you really do feel
Yeah.
comfortable in there. I'll tell you what, I've got to tell you, just as a matter of record, your husband sounds quite a guy. He certainly indulged you and let you sort of follow, not let you, but encourage you to follow this, which is amazing. And some people might say that you're a little bit obsessive about the AT. You even gave your cats trail-related names, I found.
I did.
So what they called?
Our oldest cat is named Sobo, and she was the only one we were going to have. And we found that with going away, we felt she might be lonely. So we got another cat, and we named her Blaze, but she passed last June. And then so we got another cat, and we named him Puds. Puds is just a great name. It's not fun on the trail, but it definitely is a great name for a cat.
Pointless ups and downs.
Named Nero. So
Nero.
So we have Sobo, Puds, and Nero. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great. Now, this is a kind of this little story I want you to tell, because when we spoke about doing this interview, you touched on this, and I told my wife, and she got very emotional about it. She lost her father last year or year before last, and when we spoke about, when we spoke about it, you told me about your father's bucket list. And can you tell the story to the listeners? And is that what got you into hiking in the first place?
Well, my dad was young when he passed, and he found out he had cancer in December of 2010, and he passed in June of 2011. A couple of weeks before he passed, he wrote a bucket list. It wasn't long. It was like 5 items on there. But number 1 was walk, and number 3 was walk more. And it just struck me that life is so short. Like you just never know what's going to happen. And he was 69 when he passed. Yeah. And that's all he wanted at the end, was just to be able to walk. And at the time we did a lot of walking by this bike path that runs along the Mohawk River. And we started hiking that a little bit more, and then veering off into the woods. And then after my dad passed, we started veering off into the woods a little bit more. And I kind of almost felt like he was there. Like there was presence, that I could feel him. And when I'm hiking, sometimes I talk to him but it just really had an impact as to you have to get over all those hurdles in your life, because you just don't know what's going to happen. You just don't know how long you have. So you can't let your fears hold you back. You can't let these hurdles that we face in life hold us back, because we have to enjoy every day. We have to appreciate every star that's in the sky and every sunset and sunrise, because we just don't know. And that his passing had a huge impact on me.
Of course it did. And, the thing you just mentioned about you talked to him in the woods. My mother passed at 59. My father passed at 72. My brother at 56, for God's sake. And I found myself talking to them a lot when I was hiking as well. I hadn't really thought about it until you actually mentioned that. Yeah, you do find yourself talking to them, don't you? And having this conversation with them. And there's a feeling that they're there. I mean, I don't think they are, but there's a feeling that they're there, and you can literally have a conversation with them and tell them all the things you wanted to tell them when they were, once they'd passed, and you should have told them when they were alive. So I'm glad I appreciate you telling us that. But there was one other thing. You said that number 1 was walk, number 3 was walk more. What was number 2 on the list?
He wanted the entire family. I have a brother and a sister, and they've got families, and he wanted all of us to go to Disney World together, because we used to go as a family when I was a kid, like every couple of years. And so he wanted us all to go to Disney. And
that couldn't happen, I presume, could it either?
No, we weren't all able to go together.
Yeah, but you're doing the hiking, and one day perhaps you'll go together to Disney as well. So So he knew he maybe didn't live to hear you hiking and doing the AT, but he knew you were walking. So I'm sure he got a bit of a kick out you walking as well. So that must be nice for you to know that you're doing that and thinking about him while you're doing it.
Sometimes when I'm struggling up a hill, I'll go, "Is this what you meant by walk and walk more?"
Yeah.
All these miles on the trail.
I reckon the walk more. I think point number 3, the walk more, was for you more than anything else. Oh dear. So how many miles, what's the total number of miles you've done on the AT so far?
I hit 1,024 last night.
Wow, 1,024. Wow, you're nearly
Yeah.
halfway there. Isn't that extraordinary when you think how you started off? And so, and have you thought when you're going to finish, and have you thought where you're going to finish as well?
I'm not sure when I'm going to finish as I get further. Like this year, I'm planning to get as far as Woods Hole Hostel.
All right.
And then at that point, it's going to have to be longer times out in order to do it because it's going to be too far to drive over the weekend.
Yeah.
So I'm
Could
not
move
sure.
again.
I've
You
got
could
to
move
get my
again, couldn't you?
mileage. Yeah, I could. Move further south.
Exactly. Yeah.
Weather's warmer,
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where I want to finish because Katahdin is epic for sure. And it would be a great finish. But we had a very interesting experience when we hiked Mount Washington. So I'm a person where if something kind of defeats me a little bit, I have to go back and do it again just to prove that I'm stronger than that. So
what was the what was that? What was the interesting experience?
Well, because of my asthma, I figured it's a really long climb up Mount Washington. So I've got a great idea. Let's take the hiker shuttle to the top of Mount Washington and hike down to Crawford Notch. And then the next day we'll take the hiker shuttle up again and we'll do Mount Washington to Pinkham Notch. Great idea. It won't bother my asthma. Yeah. But my knees were already bothering me. Right. So Crawford Pass was pretty good. And then when you hit Jackson, you've got all those rock scrambles. And we were up against sunset, which was the most spectacular sunset I think I've ever seen from Mount Webster.
Wow.
And it just started getting dark. My knees were killing me. And, we lost one of our water bottles. And I just remembered that map at the top of the mountain with the red dots. And I said, I don't want to be one of those red dots. We really need to find somewhere to camp. Because fortunately, I knew how dangerous Mount Washington could be. Yeah. And so I said, let's pack just in case we end up having to spend the night. So we had all our gear with us for a day hike, which turned out great. So we ended up self-camping and between Webster and Webster Cliffs, and next day hiked the rest of the way out and did not go back to do the other side.
Wow,
so there's something that defeated me about that. So I kind of want to go back and part of me wants to finish up there because I had that experience where I cried on the way down and it was not good. So I'd like to go back and prove I'm stronger than that.
And not cry on the way down. Yeah, quite right too.
And not cry on the way down.
So finally, what has the AT taught you about yourself, Maria? You said you were shy before. You don't sound the least bit shy at the moment. So what has it given you a confidence in yourself?
It has given me a confidence in myself. Before setting out on the AT and meeting people and doing all this, I was shy. I was mistrusting of people and didn't really think myself that strong. I thought of myself as being kind of weak and not capable of doing things. So once I started doing this, I just got more confident. I got more secure in being alone. Definitely realized that I'm a lot stronger than I ever thought I was, and I'm more capable of doing things than I ever thought I was. It also brought out what my husband calls my Wheezy personality, which is, outgoing and no filter. And and I just learned how to trust people because I've met so many people on trail, through hikers and day hikers and section hikers. And then you've got your people that, shuttle, Rhonda and George in New Jersey and Stanimals and just these great people who are just there to help you. And I hitched for the first time, and I would have never done that years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was, people are really good. And that's one of the things I've learned through my travels too, is that it's just something about that trail and the people that surround it that I know there's problems on the trail, just like everywhere else, but I think it really brings out the best in people.
I agree.
And
totally.
It opens people up and that's what it did for me. It really opened up my personality and got me to be, I think, a stronger person. And it's actually helped me land jobs because employers really like to hear that you have that perseverance to
I totally agree
get
with
up
you.
at 3:00 in the morning and drive 5 hours and hike 20 miles and then drive 5 hours home. So they like that.
I think it's a great addition to any resume. I think somebody who shows
absolutely,
the nerve, the willing, and the ambition to go and do something like this, I think, is an extraordinary thing. And the fact that they've done it, put it on their resume, I should think should actually affect a bunch of employers rather. And do you think your dad would be proud of you if he knew what you'd done?
I think so. I always think that he would have really enjoyed doing this with me.
I'm sure.
So I think he'd really be proud.
He's doing it with you, isn't he? Because you think about him when you're up there, so he's doing it with you. So that's okay. You share it with you share it with him. I'm sure he's one of the last people you think of when you close your eyes in your tent at night as well. So I think it's a lovely. I think what you're doing is a lovely testimony to him in many ways, and I think that's great.
It is.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
I was so taken by it when I read the email. I really wanted to have you on the show, so I appreciate you giving us the time.
Oh, and thank you for doing such a great podcast.
Appreciate that. Thanks a lot. All right. Hopefully we'll speak again soon. And I tell you, let me know if the podcast's still going in a couple of years' time and you're several more miles down, or you go to Mount Washington, you've got any other adventures to tell us, just call back in 5 or 6 months' time and let me know what you're doing. And we'll have a little 10-minute chat then. All right?
That sounds great.
Lovely. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you. Bye.
Bye. Now, isn't that dedication? She moved to Duncannon to continue to get her Appalachian Trail fix. And the way she just battles through her asthma and dodgy knee. If you've got either of those, hiking wouldn't normally be your first choice, but she just loves it. She even had to conquer fears of camping alone in the woods before she could do it. Then she realised it's no big deal. How inspirational was she? It was a story about her dad's bucket list that really got to me, though. And I thought that she articulated the meaning that she took from that story in such a heartfelt way. If you want to do this, do it when you can. You may never have the chance again. Oh yeah, by the way, she emailed me earlier this week and her mileage total has gone up to 1,050.2, which takes her past halfway. Awesome stuff, Wheezy P. Now, it's Gary Sizer and the Foothills Trail. Gary is such a natural storyteller and even breaks the story down into sections. Here's Gary Sizer. Okay, we're on with a friend of the show and a fellow podcaster, Gary Sizer. Hi, Gary. How are you?
Good morning. I'm excellent. How are you?
But you're always excellent, aren't you? You always sound so chipper, which is great. A wonderful thing.
Well,
and
I've just had my coffee.
All right, that gets you chipper. Quite right too. Now, I've asked Gary to come on and talk about the Foothills Trail, and all I know about the Foothills Trail is that it's in North and South Carolina. Gary knows everything else about it, hopefully. And when did you do this trail, Gary?
That's about it. That's about it. It was good talking with you, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. When did you do it? Or have you done it a few times?
I've only done it once. A few years ago, I did, I think, like a 10 or 12-mile section with a friend of mine, just as an overnight trip, and I really didn't appreciate the magnitude of what we were doing until last November. I did the whole thing. So the whole thing is 76.6 miles.
Right.
And it starts in South Carolina and finishes in North Carolina, but you cross into North Carolina about 14 times during those 76 miles. So it's basically right on the state line.
Right. And I looked up a little bit of the history that was put in place by 1981, linking the Oconee and Table Rock State Parks, apparently.
That's right.
Is it, and the reason I want to do some of these shorter trails, but this is regarded as a long trail because it's more than 50 miles, apparently. Is it a good shakedown hike for the AT?
Oh, I think it's a perfect shakedown hike for the AT for so many reasons. First of all, don't underestimate it because of its name, the Foothills Trail. It's mostly low. It's mostly low elevations, but you still get some big climbs.
Right.
I think the lowest point on the trail is, I think it's like just under 1,000 feet, or pretty close to 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
But it goes up to almost 4,000 at the highest point.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's a couple of 2,000-foot climbs, a couple of 1,500-foot climbs.
Is it a similar style to the AT?
It's very similar style to the AT. It even has white blazes.
Oh, does it? Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. But the reason I was saying it's a good shakedown hike for the AT is because it has a lot of potential bailout points. So if you need to quit, if you need to adjust gear, if you need to set resupply or shuttle somewhere along the way, you're going to cross about 10 different roads in those 76 miles. And I think at least 4 of them are designated like trailheads with parking areas and, restroom facilities.
So you could almost have a customized hike quite easily, couldn't you? You could go in partway through. And is there a loop anywhere at all, or is it just literally one end to one end?
It's one end to one end, but it intersects many other trails, like the Bartram Trail. It intersects that in the middle, and what's this other one? Ravens Rocks, and there's a few others. So you could probably design a loop, but you're going to need to bring other trails into it.
And a map. No doubt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Foothills Trail Conservancy has an excellent guidebook and plenty of maps and good logistics and planning on their website.
I checked the website. It's a nice website as well. It's like a mini ATC, isn't it? The whole thing. So
it is, yeah.
It also mentions the Laurel Fork Falls. Now, I know there's one on the AT. Is there another Laurel Fork Falls, or is it the very same thing?
It's kind of like, how there's 10 sassafras gaps.
I do.
And
that was the other one I was going to say.
Yeah,
Sassafras Mountain.
Yeah. Yep. There's actually 3 Laurel Fork Falls. I can think of another near Asheville. But wanted to talk about the actual trail itself.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm still answering your first question, like why is it a good shakedown hike for the AT?
Yeah.
Is because, in addition to those pretty, forgiving logistics, you also get a really nice sampling of different types of terrain. Right. So what I like to say, I like to break the hike into thirds. So it's, 76 miles. So about 3 25-mile sections.
Right.
People with trail legs have done this after the AT in, 3 days, or even as an overnighter, if you can believe it.
Wow.
But the first 1/3 of the trail, the westernmost portion where I started, Oconee State Park, you spend about a day and a half following the Chattooga River, which is this wide, it's flat, but there are cascades. So you'll have long, flat stretches and then waterfalls.
Beautiful.
Excellent trout fishing. It's actually that river is the state line between South Carolina and Georgia. So it's actually a tri-state experience.
Okay.
And it's in a kind of a steep gorge, and the trail is literally steps from the water, and some of the campsites are right there on the river. So that first third of the trail it is a very unique character. You feel it's that green tunnel feel where you're nestled in, and there's little streams and fish, and it's Appalachia.
Yeah, beautiful. So you can camp right by the river, can you?
In many spots. In fact, there are some campsites that are at the base of waterfalls, which is something that the Foothills Trail is known for.
Yeah.
I forget the exact number of named waterfalls. Some of them are, 0.1, 0.2 off the trail. Some of them are right there on the trail. I think I saw at least 15 to 20 waterfalls on my hike.
Are there any shelters in there, or is it all just camping?
No shelters, all primitive style campsites. There's one point where the trail goes through an actual campground, where people can actually drive up, and
yes, nice.
Where they had bare cables and restroom facilities, but most of it's
bloody luxury.
Backcountry camping.
Bloody luxury, that is.
It is, yeah. It was
glamping.
Nope. Yeah, no shower, but there's a river right there. So.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So, what about the rest of the trail? So that's the first third. What about the second third?
Mm-hmm. So the middle third is really neat because it goes around something called Lake Jocassee, and it's a finger lake, and it's a mountain lake too. So the mountains come right up to the edge of the water.
Oh, beautiful!
And there are places where you get these big reflective pools of clear water where you can see the mountains and the sky and the clouds reflected in calm waters. But since it is the foothills, those lakes exist, at the what is it, the mouth or the foot of a river? What the rivers empty into the lakes. So,
wow.
The trail as far as where it's actually placed, is kind of along the banks of those lakes, and in multiple places you'll cross on these beautifully engineered suspension bridge, footbridges that cross the rivers that feed into the lake. So, you'll find yourself standing on these bridges, and like you just look to your left and there's raging whitewater rapids, and then just below your feet it empties calmly into the lake, and as you turn to the right you see the beautiful calm lake, and it's really interesting to see all of that come together right there.
I would think, yeah.
Now I mentioned the bridges, the beautiful footbridges. They're wood and steel cables, and I think one of them is 275 feet.
Wow.
It's just
proper bridge.
It's amazing. Like the vertical posts holding this thing up are literal telephone poles.
Wow.
But it's just out in the middle. Like they had to helicopter this stuff in. I mean, there's no roads nearby, and it's just amazing to see how well maintained this thing is.
I was going to ask about that. Is it well maintained in the same sort of style as the AT as well?
It is. The Conservancy does a great job, and Duke Energy, I forget how much of the trail they maintain, but there's at least a couple dozen miles maintained by the local power company.
That is a good answer, to have a local power. Now, that's interesting. That would be an interesting concept, that the local power company should take some responsibility for these things, wouldn't it?
And they have. And it's one of the best maintained, not just that section of trail, but just trails in general. The Duke Energy parts where they maintain are not just some of the best maintained sections of that trail, but some of the best maintained sections of trail overall that I've walked.
Wow. Amazing. That is a nice thing to have. So what about the last? So you go around the lake, you've done your 25 miles or your middle section around the lake. And what about the last section?
Yep. You go around the lake, and then the final section is where you go east into Table Rock State Park.
Right.
And then that's just a whole, well, first of all, before you get to Table Rock, so this eastern third of the trail is where all the big climbs and high elevation are. To get out of the lake area, you go up something they called Heartbreak Ridge.
Heartbreak Ridge, okay, yeah.
Heartbreak Ridge. Do you remember Jacob's Ladder on the AT?
I do, very well. Bloody endless.
It's kind of like that. You get to the top and what you think is the top, and there's just more, and it just keeps going.
I did up every mountain, every single mountain. I thought I was at the top. I was nowhere near it every time.
Eventually, once you get a couple miles past Heartbreak Ridge, you get on to something called it's either, I can't remember if it's Sassafras Mountain or Sassafras Mountain, which is the highest point in South Carolina.
Wow.
3,700 feet, 3,800, something like that. Okay. You can see all South Carolina from there.
The 76 miles, did you say you started on the Oconee side, and finished at Table Rock State Parks? Yeah. So is that the regular way, or do people just go in both directions, or is there a traditional way, so to speak?
Well, there's not really any of those, because I'll give you an example. So I took my time. I wanted to really experience the trail. I took 7 days to do it.
Cool.
And during those 7 days, I met one other person who was hiking the entire trail, and they were going the opposite direction. So based on anecdotal evidence, I would say it's an equal mix of people going both ways, but for this data set, N equals 2, which is not many. So
exactly, yes. It doesn't exactly tell you everything, does it? So you would recommend this, but I think people have to watch out for this, because some people, while they love the idea of a hike, the idea of seeing nobody at all doesn't appeal to everybody. Is the solitude pretty much a guarantee there, or is it not a well-trodden path?
I ran into a couple of day hikers, and that one night that I spent at the campground, there were probably about 20 different groups.
All right, that's not too bad.
Driven in, but as for primitive campsites, I was alone every single night. It's a pretty quiet trail, and I think like I said at the beginning of our conversation, people tend to underestimate it because of the name foothill.
Yeah. Sounds beautiful, though. I must say, the way in which you tell it, I love the idea of different sections. I know there are quite a few sections of the AT. I look back on mine, I loved it all. They kind of blur a little bit sometimes, but to have 3 distinct sections is a really good way to look at any trail, isn't it? So what have you been doing? I know you've
It
got this podcast going, and you've got your new book. Tell us about the podcast quickly. So tell people where they can find stories from the trail.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're called Stories from the Trail, and we are part of the Trek.co family of podcasts. Maybe you've heard of Pox and Puss is a really famous one.
Yes.
We were the second show. Zach Davis started his own called Backpacker Radio. So there's a whole network of outdoors related podcasts that are forming under the Trek.co label.
Cool.
I co-host with my friend Megan, aka Voldemort. Anyone who's read Where's the Next Shelter may remember that name, because she and I hiked most of the trail together along with her friend Lemmy.
Yeah.
But we have it's basically our excuse to stay in touch. Every 2 weeks we get together and talk about what's happening in the current state of not just the AT but trails in general.
Yeah.
One episode we interviewed a guy who hunts Sasquatch. This next one
I listened.
Putting together live audio from the kickoff. So,
it was hilarious.
Yeah, we're trying to. Oh, here we're taking someone on their first ever overnight backpacking trip, and
I know,
recording that.
Yeah.
So, we do a little bit of studio interview stuff. We get out in the trails. We try to mix it up.
Cool. So they can find it on iTunes and all the normal places, I presume.
iTunes, Spotify, pretty much anywhere quality shows are found.
Okay, mate. Well, thanks very much indeed for talking. By the way, I would recommend to anybody, I didn't read Where's the Next Shelter. I listened to Gary narrate it. It is hilarious, and especially his voice of Lemmy. I don't know Lemmy at all, but I feel like I know him through Gary's voice, so I strongly recommend that, I tell you.
Yeah, and somebody, a couple of times I've been accused of doing a weird voice, or in one of the reviews somebody said, I wish he hadn't done that stupid voice.
Oh, I loved it.
Anybody who knows Lemmy will tell you that I do a spot on, 100% accurate. That's how he speaks. I'm not making fun. It's Green Giant. It's good to see you.
It really made me laugh every time Lemmy's voice came up. I was laughing out loud. I listened to it to and from trail days last year, and it was great company to have.
Well,
you were great company in the car, I tell you. So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about it, and I wish you well with the podcast.
Well, thanks, Steve. I'm glad you called.
Okay, mate. Speak to you soon. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye. Sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Maybe a bit remote for some people, but certainly worth investigating, and it sounds like a perfect shakedown hike if you are going to do the AT. And I really meant it about his audiobook. His Lemmy is a bloody classic, and I haven't even met the bloke. Next week is a fella whose real name is Ben Barbenti. However, his Facebook name, and I presume his hiking name, is Juan Dura, or Wanderer. His Facebook page has his trail name first and his real name in brackets. He's a fascinating guy with stories from all over. It's going to be fun. This week, in the first part of the 13th and final chapter of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer, our hero negotiates Mahoosuc Notch. He also experiences a very lucky coincidence in Rangeley. Next week, probably not surprisingly, we have the concluding part of Earl Schaefer's hike, and that leaves me with a bit of a dilemma. I really want to read another book, and I'm tending towards My First Summer in the Sierra by John Muir. I haven't read it yet, but would really like to know if anybody wants to suggest something different. You've got about a week to decide, and remember, don't just tell me your favourite book. I need something that I had permission to read. So, my 4-year anniversary on the top of Springer brings 2 new shows. I'm excited for the future, and I look forward to your company going forward. I'll see you next week. Chapter 13, Old Spec to Katahdin. While the dawn of summer season cast a spell on western Maine, or the lone lake-studded region and the rock-peaked Highland chain, from the crest of Old Spec Mountain on the wild Mahoosuc West to the summit of Katahdin and the ending of the quest. Crossed the Maine-New Hampshire line about 2:15, 20th of July, says the little black notebook. The morning was chilly, typical of full moon weather. The first high point beyond the line was Goose Eye Mountain, a rock dome almost devoid of vegetation. Yet a checkered adder, similar to the common garter snake, was sunning itself there. This was the last snake seen on the long cruise. Poisonous snakes are not encountered after reaching the White Mountains. Goose Eye is separated from North Peak by a narrow notch. On North Peak, in a spruce clump between the boulders, was full goose shelter. A nice spot, but Speck Pond was only 5 miles away. I was to learn that 5 miles can be a long, long haul in the state of Maine. The trail descended abruptly into a narrow, boulder-clogged ravine, where temperatures dropped just as suddenly and ice appeared in crannies. This ice was yellow with age. For at least a mile, the trail threaded this strange labyrinth while the precious hours of daylight waned. This cleft in the mountain, known as Mahoosic Notch, slanted slightly, and a brook gradually formed, coming to a beaver pond directly across the trail at the lower end. A large beaver swam boldly to the centre of the pond and ducked under while slapping its tail on the surface. This is the warning signal of the beaver, and indicated this was a mother signalling her family. She repeated the manoeuvre several times. The pool was deep, but I managed to wade along the edge and get by. Beyond the pond was an abrupt turn up the mountain. I scrambled upward over rocks and projecting roots until marking faded on an open summit. Meanwhile, a rainstorm was definitely approaching and darkness was closing in. It seemed as though my only choice was to find shelter among the rocks. Then a sound, totally unexpected at such a place, solved the situation. The piping of tree frogs drifted up through the calm before the storm, and they could only be at Speck Pond. So, step by step through the cloudy darkness, I moved among rocks and thickets of spruce to the shore of the lake and followed it around to the shelter. Ever since, when the homeland meadows are turning green and the silvery lilt of those tiny peepers livens the night, I think of the time when they helped me come to port on the long cruise. The bough bed inside the log lean-to was a welcome couching place that night as the rainstorm swept violently across Old Speck. Later, the sky cleared and the late moon was reflected in the lake. Even the little frogs were silent then. With the dawn came a whirring sound in the woods, like 2 or 3 power saws, another species of frog serenading the sunrise. Speck Pond showed deeply blue within its border of spruce. It is said that the bottom of this lake, the highest in Maine, has never been found. Some people say it was caused by a falling meteor, but its location within a conical peak definitely indicates its origin was volcanic. Its overflow is down to Mahoosic Notch through a great ravine or gulf in the side of Old Speck. This cleft continues through the notch and seems to extend all the way to the Great Gulf of Mount Washington, as though a great explosion between the craters had cracked the earth. Old Speck is the 3rd highest peak in Maine and second only to Katahdin in scenic beauty. The Appalachian Trail circled the rim rock of Old Speck Mountain over outcroppings of quartzite and other minerals mixed with granite to the fire tower on the highest point. I climbed up for a look around and to get aerial pictures of Speck Pond and Mahoosic Notch. Rugged tops and ridges surround the peak, with the main extension of the White Mountains running northeast to Baldpate, Saddleback and Sugarloaf. Part way down the far side, I stopped at the warden's cabin to talk with Reggie Lord, a student at the University of Maine, when not holding down the job of lookout on Old Speck. He said this tower was not popular because of the long steep climb out of Grafton Notch, but he liked it because it kept him in shape for athletics. Beyond Grafton Notch, I side-trailed to Table Rock, then moved along to Baldpate, a dome-shaped peak just reaching timberline. There, for the first time, I encountered the drastic temperature change that can prevail at timberline. Above it, I wore all my clothing and the poncho. Below it, all extra clothing had to be removed. Early stars were shining when I came to Fry Brook and groped through the darkening woods to the shelter. In the morning, when going back to photograph the waterfalls, the path skirted the rim of a miniature canyon at some places. Guess my guardian angel was with me that evening. Beyond Andover Road was Elephant Mountain, remote and difficult to travel. Sometimes the trail was on corduroy, left after logging in winter. The cross logs were left suspended when the snow melted, on stumps and slash, and now were beginning to rot. How hazardous this was can be imagined. Somewhere in all that tangled wilderness was an especially beautiful lake where people had camped. Painted in blue on a rock was, "God bless our home." Toward evening, I came to the shore of another lake at Camp Kewadden. Many waterfowl were floating or flying in the vicinity. Mosquitoes were vicious. At twilight, the lone expedition came to Elephant Mountain Lean-To. Cold weather socked in about midnight, and morning brought dreary rain that lasted all day. The trail was rough, with many blowdowns, some lengthwise on the path. By early evening I had progressed only 8 miles to Sabbath Day Pond, where the roof of the lean-to had collapsed so that water was running in inside of out. But the storm had become a real nor'easter with a strong headwind, and stop I must. I managed to start a fire and cook what little food I had remaining, then wrapped in everything I had under the poncho in the least wet corner of the lean-to. There I stayed the rest of the day, and all night, neither asleep nor awake, but in a kind of stupor. At dawn, a loon, first I had ever heard, began its echo wailing and crazy laughter somewhere. Right then it seemed as though an utter pall of rain and melancholy had enwrapped the entire earth. At such a place, without food, it was almost impossible to wait out the storm. Actually, it was almost over anyway. The rain eased as I travelled on, stopping once to watch a deer browse across the trail ahead, then coming to a road crossing. My map indicated Rangeley to the left. A bottled gas salesman soon came along and took me along to town, where I found a grocery store and also an information booth where a lady gave me an official map of Maine. The town of Rangeley, by the lake of the same name, is one of the better-known resort centres of western Maine, with hotels and camps along the shore. Nearby is another lake called Moosilauke. I waited in front of the store and behold, the same gas serviceman came along and took me back to the trail crossing, just as the man in the Model A had in Swatara Gap in Pennsylvania. My luck had changed for the moment. The terrain beyond the highway had been completely wrecked by the hurricane, with summer growth and brush growing through the fallen trees. Sometimes the going was easier in the woods parallel to the trail. Conditions improved near Piazza Rock lean-to. The rock juts out so far that trees grow underneath as well as on top. Saddleback loomed high ahead, and conditions were good for a picture, so I started up the slope, reaching the open crest in time to get a sunset picture over Rangeley Lake. Beyond on the skyline were the boundary mountains between Maine and Canada. Another picture a few minutes later shows the trail crossing a rounded dome, with the late sunlight streaking the picture, one of the best taken on the long cruise. After that, I headed for the tree line and slept under some stunted spruce. Breakfast was eaten at Poplar Ridge lean-to. At Orbiton Stream, a sign said, "Trail closed, in bad condition to Bigelow. Travel at your own risk." Blazes were gone, except for the original axe cuts, which could be followed as far as Spalding lean-to, where I stopped to cook dinner, clearing away weeds in front of the shelter and even inside. Beyond was a mass of tangled down timber, grown through with summer growth. Sometimes I stumbled and fell headlong, the pack banging the back of my head. Once my knee missed a jagged rock by no more than an inch. Surely my guardian angel was with me that afternoon. Not even an ankle sprain resulted. Meanwhile, the sky was chaotic, as though another violent storm was hovering over the wilderness. Getting stranded in this forsaken backcountry would have been disastrous. Finally, the trail emerged on the open summit of Sugarloaf Mountain, second highest in Maine at 42.37 feet. The 2 miles I had just hiked were the last to be completed of the original route in 1937. Right then it looked as though it had never been built at all. Chained to the topmost boulder on Sugarloaf was a bronze cylinder containing a register. 5 people had signed it in as many years. 2 of them, Jimmy Calloway and Paul Yambert. The lean-to was on the far slope, and a large tree had fallen directly on the roof, leaving just enough space at one end for me to crawl in. What a relief it was to be through that hurricane wreckage. The village of Bigelow at the Carabasset River was almost deserted. I saw no one there. Bigelow Village and Sugarloaf Mountain are now a deluxe skiing centre, greatly changed in appearance from 1948. The trail beyond the village was passable, with several beaver ponds on the way to Horns Pond lean-tos. A steep climb goes to the top of the Horns, which give an aerial view of the back trail. From there, the route is on the crest of the Bigelow Range, with Bigelow Col as a deep notch separating the twin peaks of Bigelow. One of them has been renamed in honour of Myron Avery, and a memorial shelter is in the col. The fire lookout in the tower of East Bigelow was a young man just out of high school. He said that a foot of snow was on the ground when he came on duty in the spring, and that strong winds often howled across the peaks at night, but he still liked the job of lookout. The ridge was named for a Colonel Bigelow who was with Benedict Arnold on the ill-fated expedition across Maine during the Revolution in an attempt to capture Quebec. Had this been successful, Canada would probably be a part of the United States today. The expedition bogged down in the Dead River Valley on the north side of the Bigelow Range. Much of the valley is now a backwater from a large dam. The trail continued over Little Bigelow, coming down to the Ledge House, soon to be abandoned because of the dam. In the deep dusk, I came to Jerome Brook Lean-To, which had been flooded by a beaver dam several years before. Dynamiting the dam did no good. The beaver rebuilt it. They had to be live trapped and moved far away. Usually it is only the trail and not a lean-to that is flooded. In the morning, at West Carry Pond Camps, a lady was hanging out wash behind the big log lodge. She looked me over sharply, then invited me in for coffee and donuts, introducing herself in a roundabout way by saying Mr. Story was away getting a boat he had bought and wouldn't be back before evening. As we sat in the big front room, facing the lake, a big mink darted out and scurried among the boats and canoes on the landing. Mrs. Story told how Calloway and Yambert came by one rainy day. They were having a bad time. One had twisted his knee so badly he could hardly walk, and the other had cut his hand with the axe. Their loads were heavy, which didn't help. Mrs. Story said she would write the trail people, first time I heard the term, and tell them about my coming by. They always stayed at the camps when trail working in that area. Her daughter Louise had been fishing along the shore, came in as I was about to leave. A week later, while in the new boat with her father, she caught a togue, local name for lake trout, that weighed 16 pounds and was 31 inches long. It was so big and heavy she could hardly hold it for the picture they sent at Christmas time. Carry Pond evidently provides some very good fishing. The first thing I saw at East Carry Pond was a pair of loons. A loon is somewhere between a wild goose and a penguin, both in appearance and performance. It is awkward on land and not too good at flying, but is an expert swimmer, able to stay underwater as long as 5 minutes and apt to come up where you least expect. Its call is very distinctive, either a melodious echo wailing or the cackling laughter for which it is best known. Loons prefer the far back lake country and will leave if too many people appear. At the camps on East Carry Pond, I talked with F.D. Gaskell, the proprietor, and his family. He said this was called the Great Carrying Place because the Old Canada Road, the Arnold Trail, and the Appalachian Trail all met there. Travellers up the Kennebec would make the short carries between the lakes and across the Dead River, which took them to the Boundary Mountains, where another carry took them across to Lake Megantic in Canada. The Gaskells invited me to stay at the camps, but too much daylight remained, and I moved along to Pierce Pond Lean-To.